Welcome, everybody, in Facebook world. My name is Tim Stratton, and I'm with Freethinking Ministries, and I'm in a room full of youth pastor friends of mine and a few other people who are joining us, and this is exciting because we've got a packed room in here, and I know that so many more are joining us over there at lunch hour, maybe, depending on what time zone you're in. But we're thankful that you're here with us. Today we're going to be discussing one of my favorite arguments, and it's called the Kalam Cosmological argument. One reason why I like this argument so much is I refer to it as kind of a wrecking ball of sorts. Imagine this whole wall built up of lies that keep people from seeing the cross, that keep people from understanding the gospel. Well, I see the Kalam as kind of like this big wrecking ball that just smashes into that wall of lies and destroys it so that people might be able to see the cross, so that people might be able to start to understand the gospel. So the Kalam, in my opinion, it's an argument that I love to start with. If I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're like, I just don't see any good reason to think God exists or any good reason to think Christianity is true. Well, I take them a step at a time, and this is the first step that I start with. So let's start with the wrecking ball argument, known as the Kalam Cosmological argument. Before I share the actual argument with you, we need to define a few terms and clarify a few ideas. First, we need to understand what we mean by the term universe. What do you mean by universe? Well, when I refer to the universe, I'm talking about everything matter, energy, space, and time. I like to say that the universe is everything in time and space, including time and space and all of its contents. Everything nature. In other words, sometimes I'll say the universe is all nature and everything in time and space. So nature, people define that differently, but science is typically defined as the study of nature. So the study of the universe. Anything that could possibly be tested or discovered scientifically, well, that's what I'm going to refer to as nature. So the universe is all nature and everything in time and space. So that includes all the stars, planets, mountains, trees, people, animals, dust, radiation, the quantum vacuum, subatomic particles, anything you can think of that science has anything to do with, that's included in the term universe. So, now that we understand what the universe is, let's discuss what we mean by the word cause. There's different definitions of cause. Aristotle distinguished several different kinds of causation, but for our purposes, we're going to be discussing a cause. We're going to define cause as something that makes something else happen. And in this case, something that makes something else begin to exist. I'll get into that more later. I also want to discuss time. The issue of time is very important when it comes to this argument. So let's think about the idea of time. Does yesterday or the past exist? What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Does yesterday exist?
Yeah.
Where's it at?
Yesterday.
Can you get to it? Well, what about tomorrow? Does tomorrow exist?
Possibly not.
Yeah. Where's it at? How would you get there?
B theory. It's in the block.
There's different theories of time. There's what's called the A theory of time and the B theory of time. The A theory of time is also called dynamic time, or maybe the tensed version of time. It has to do with something called temporal becoming. That yesterday is actually gone. It did exist, but now it's gone. And tomorrow will exist, but it doesn't. Well, not yet. And the present moment that we're experiencing right now does exist. That's what's called the common sense view of time, otherwise known as the dynamic or A theory of time. Now there's another view of time called the B theory. That's also called the block theory of time, or static time. And that means that every moment of past, present, and future is all equally real. And let me draw a picture of it here. It's kind of, they call it the block theory. So imagine a block. That this is actually the universe. Sorry for not straight lines. There you go. But imagine that that's a block of a universe. And that the people, I guess, or anything that exists in the universe, they're really actually more like worms. Isn't that kind of weird? I've got some articles on this on my website if you'd like to look into it. But then you can take, and what we experience are just little slices or just little moments of that. So it goes against what's the common sense view of time, but then moments are divided into slices. Just like you would slice a loaf of bread, right? These are different moments, and you can get thick moments or thin moments or whatever. But on that view, nothing really happens. Nothing really changes. It's just an illusion of change. So if you think things really change, for example, when I'm talking to evolutionists who say that change over time is evolution, and this change over time provides an explanation for primate complexity today, well, then they can't affirm the B-theory block. Okay? If you think that evolution really provides an explanation for primate complexity of change over time, then you cannot affirm the block theory, because the evolved complex primate here is just as old or ageless as the single-cell common ancestor on this side of the block. So there's no genuine change over time. It's just an illusion of that. Anyway, I contend that the A theory is true, and that there's good reason to think that the A theory of time is true based on philosophical arguments, metaphysical arguments, and even scientific arguments based on how things change over time, even with evolution. Don't want to get into that whole conversation right now. I'm just saying that there's scientific reasons to doubt the B theory. So, we are going to assume that the A theory is true. The argument we did last week, called the Leibnizian cosmological argument, doesn't depend on the A theory being true. It works on both the A theory and the B theory of time. So if one is committed to the B theory for some reason, you could just hang out with Leibniz and be just fine. So, I do think that yesterday is gone. So when I ask, does yesterday or the past exist, I would encourage you to write no, but that's up to you. But when you finish your exam, don't you say, I'm glad that's over. So things in the past, I contend, are gone. They don't exist anymore. Time travel would be impossible. Does the future, or does tomorrow or the future exist? I would say not yet, but it will exist. So the only time that actually exists is now, or today. And if you think that things really do change over time, then you should hold to the dynamic view of time, otherwise known as the A theory. So past, present, and future things are not equally real on this view. On the B theory, they are equally real. So there's people existing in 1985 right now. Everything is just one big moment. There's not multiple moments. Anyway, with all of that clarified, or maybe I've just confused you, now we can start the Kalam. And I'll tell you this, if you feel confused, go to freethinkingministries.com and click around. Type in time theory in the search bar, or the B theory of time. I've got several articles on that, some written in a more pop-level introductory form, and some that get a little more technical. You can learn a lot there, and also go to Dr. Craig's work at reasonablefaith.org. Okay, well, let's talk about the Kalam. I'm going to offer a version of the Kalam that's slightly different than normal, just because it's got an added step to it. Typically, the Kalam goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. But let's look at this one. We're going to add a step to it. It goes, premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And 4. This cause is God. All right. if an argument is going to be successful, it's got to be a logically valid argument. That means the structure has to be correct. And then the premises have to be true. So if you've got an argument, a deductive argument in which the structure is correct, there's not mistakes in the structure, and that the premises are true, or the premises even seem more probably true than their negation, then you've got a good argument. And if the premises are true and the structure is valid, then the conclusion is guaranteed to be true. So if you've got an argument dealing with premises that seem like they're probably true, then the conclusion will be true if the premises are true. And if the premises are probably true, then you could say, well, this deductive conclusion is probably true as well. So let's examine these steps, or what we call premises of the Kalam cosmological argument. Step 1, is it true? Or is it at least more likely true than false? Well, yes. Let's examine it. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Well, why think a thing like that? Should we believe that this premise is true? Well, for one thing, science confirms it every day. That's the job of the scientist, is to study cause and effect relationships. So what begins to come into existence is constantly confirmed every day by empirical observation and the scientific method. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Right? The decay of uranium causes lead to come into existence. The factory causes the car to come into existence. And your parents caused you to come into existence. So, whatever begins existing is caused to come into existence by something else. Isn't this completely obvious? If you hear a loud bang, wouldn't you ask, what caused that bang? I would hope you would say yes to that, especially if it's in the middle of the night. Sometimes my wife hears little noises and wakes me up. Tim, go check that out. We want to know what causes noises, and especially what would cause bangs in the middle of the night. Also consider this. What if a tiger just suddenly began to exist in front of you and started chasing you around? Well, wouldn't you want to know how that tiger got there? Maybe not right at that exact moment. Maybe your first concern is getting away from the tiger. But after you got away from the tiger, you want to know how in the world, what caused that tiger to begin existing right in front of my face? Something had to cause it to exist, right? I would hope you all say yes. I mean, would you really believe that that tiger just appeared there? It just popped into existence out of nothing for no reason at all? That would be worse than magic. At least in a magic show, when the magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat, it's not uncaused. I mean, at least you've got the magician and you've got a hat, even if you don't know how the magician caused the rabbit to come out of the hat. At least you see causation in front of you. To assume something could just pop into existence out of nothing uncaused is worse than magic. So step 1 seems to be most probably true. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. We don't have any reason to reject that. And at the very least, it seems more probably true than false. So what about the second step? The universe began to exist. Is that step true? Well, I certainly think the answer to that is yes. The universe began to exist because time had to have a beginning. Think about that. Because before today came into existence, well, the day before that would have had to come into existence. But the day before that would have to come into existence. But the day before that would have to come into existence. And so on and so forth. To infinity? Can you do that? If today actually exists? If this present moment is really real right now? How could you have an infinite number of days if today actually exists? You can't go on and on forever. If you keep doing this forever without stopping at a beginning, how can you get to today? Think about the example of borrowing money. No, let's don't do that, because too many people today think you can't keep borrowing money into the infinite future. Well, here's one that I like. Let's think about, let me erase this block. And let's think about, if you saw a guy, I was an art minor for a while, but I haven't been doing art for a while, so it's got a lot worse. Okay, I'm just going to draw a stick figure. Okay, so you've got a guy, here's his legs, and his arms. Okay, that's a horrible looking guy. But you run into this guy, and he's standing on the ground next to a big hole in the ground. Big hole. And he says to you, hey, I just jumped out of this hole, and it's an infinitely tall, bottomless pit. I just jumped out of it. Now, how many of you would believe him? Well, you're all shaking your heads, but then what if he said this? Hey, I'm actually a superhero, and I have the superpower to be able to jump infinitely tall. I can jump infinitely high. That's my superpower. Now, you may or may not believe in superheroes, but at least it's logically possible. Maybe he says, well, God has granted me the ability to jump infinitely high. And I have just jumped out of this infinitely tall, bottomless pit. How many of you would believe him? I contend that nobody should believe him. In fact, nobody should even go look down this hole. You don't even need to look down the hole to see if this guy's telling the truth, because you can know that he's either delusional or deceptive. One of the two. Think about it. If he jumped out of an infinitely tall bottomless pit, what's he going to jump off of? If the ground right here is equal to the present day, the present moment, whatever you want to call it, right? So getting out of this hole and standing on the ground is equal to the present moment. How can he jump out of an infinitely tall, bottomless pit? There's no foundation from which to jump. So it would be impossible to jump out of an infinitely tall, bottomless pit and get to the present moment or the ground. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody here in the room? Okay. Now, what if he changes it then and says, oh, okay, well, it's not infinitely tall. It's just, like 5 miles tall, and I have the ability to jump, Okay, well, as soon as you add a foundation, then it's not infinitely tall anymore, no matter how deep it is. So if we think of the ground as equivalent to the present moment when it comes to time, if there really is a present moment, there had to have been a first moment. Think about that. So there's some logical reasons right there. We don't even need to get into science to validate the second premise. If the universe is everything in time and space, right? The space-time universe. So if time actually exists and things really do change over time, that's just another way to say evolve. If things really do evolve and change over time, then there had to have been a first moment. And so then the space-time universe would have had to begin existing. Now, I haven't touched science, but the scientific data also supports all the logical data. And by the way, science is based on and assumes logic, but, so we shouldn't even need it, but it's nice that we have it to, continue to confirm and support what we already know based on logic. Let me tell you what Dr. Alexander Vilenkin has said. He's a cosmologist, and he's recognized today to be one of the leading cosmologists or physicists in the world when it comes to this topic. And he's not a Christian. He's not even a theist as far as I know. So he doesn't have a theological axe to grind. That's my point. But he says this: it is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of the past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. End quote. Well, why is this a problem for scientists? Well, it's not a problem for a scientist unless they're affirming or assuming atheism. That's the only time it's a problem. Or maybe it's a problem because they have scientific evidence that that's where science stops. You can't do any more science at that point. If all nature, if everything, time and space began to exist, and science is a study of all nature and time and space, then if you have scientific evidence that that's where nature, time, and space began to exist, then at that point science is over. But metaphysics can continue the job. That just means beyond physics. Anyway, scientists who study the universe, called astronomers or physicists or cosmologists like Alexander Vilenkin, they agree that the universe is expanding. So if you go back in time, the universe would get smaller and smaller and smaller until there was no universe at all. This gets us into something called Big Bang cosmology. Now, I'm not going to force anybody to affirm that Big Bang cosmology is true. In a room full of pastors, I bet we have some people that don't like the Big Bang cosmology. I'm just saying, hey, this is what scientists are telling you, okay? They're affirming Big Bang cosmology. But if that's true, and what I just read to you from Vilenkin is true, that's different data. It doesn't necessarily have to assume the Big Bang, but that's based on different data. But as far as Big Bang cosmology is concerned, the universe is expanding and expanding and expanding. Well, hey, if you're watching that, push pause, and I hit the rewind button, and it actually goes into non-existence, right? So, I'm not against the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. The Big Bang needs a Big Banger, as far as I'm concerned. But we can have that discussion later at a different time. If you've got some questions on that, I've written on it on the website. But I'm not going to force everybody to always agree with me. You don't have to. You're free to disagree. But at the bottom of page 20 here, for those of you following along in your books, if you go back in time, the universe would get smaller and smaller until there was no universe at all, so the universe began to exist. So you got Big Bang cosmology, the second law of thermodynamics and entropy, and then the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem of 2003. There's all of that scientific data that supports the second premise of the Kalam, that the universe began to exist. So we've already said, well, whatever begins to exist has a cause. And then we saw, well, the universe began to exist. Well, what logically follows? Let's go to the top of page 21. Is step 3 true? That conclusion. Therefore, the universe began to exist. Is that true? Well, it follows logically because this is a structurally valid argument. And it follows, that conclusion follows logically and deductively from number 1 and number 2. So, what is this cause of the universe? I don't want to jump to any conclusions, okay? If you notice, I don't have any Bibles up here with me, and that's intentional. I don't want to be accused of assuming the Bible is true or anything else. I want to think about this from a logical perspective and just see what we can conclude. So, for the sake of our purposes right now, just call this cause of the universe G, capital G. You can write whatever you want there, but I'm just going to refer to it as G, whatever it is. So, step 4 of the argument today says this cause of the universe is God. But I'm not going to jump to that conclusion. So, the question is, did something else cause G to exist? If it did, if you were here last week, we could see that we can call this thing G2. But did something else cause G2 to exist? If it did, then we can call that G3. And then we can have a G4 and a G5 and like a G6. Can you keep doing this forever? No, you've got the problem of an infinite regress. That must be avoided. An actual infinity could never be reached. Like I noted earlier, if an infinite past is reality, then today, the current moment, the words that you're hearing me speak right now would never be here. If the current moment does exist, there must be a first moment. You cannot have an infinite past of moments. If the current day actually exists, you cannot have an infinite past of days. You've got to have a beginning. You've got to have a first change, right? If moments or days or minutes or hours or any of those terms are confusing you, if things are actually changing, then you have to have a first change. I encourage you to go to my website, freethinkingministries.com, and read an article called Time Proves God. It's similar to the one we're looking at today, but it's a little different. I'm only dealing with time and time alone. Also, another good article is called A Choice Apart from Time. So take a look at that one too. All right, so we can't just keep going back and giving an infinite, a G1, a G2, a G3, all the way back to infinity. We can't do that. You can't keep doing this forever, or we would have the same problem all over again. How can we get today if there was never a beginning? So you got to stop somewhere, and so we'll just call that G. It's simpler. So unless you give me a good reason, I won't believe in many causes. I won't believe in a whole bunch of G's when one G is enough, if that makes sense. All right? It's the principle of Occam's razor. Right? All of us in this room, in Dallas, you said we got some treats coming later, right? Maybe something, I don't know. But imagine, what if we all indulge in these treats that might be coming later, and then we go home and we all get sick. I'm sure that's not going to happen, Dallas. But what if that happens? Should we infer something was up with those treats? Something was wrong with the treats, or should we infer, hey, all of us, I don't know how many of us are here, but each of us all got sick independently and from different sources prior to coming to the meeting today. And we all happen to have the same dessert. And we all got sick because of what happened before we got here. Is that the inference to the best explanation? Or do you think we should start with the dessert? The simpler explanation is usually correct and ought to be preferred. So, considering Occam's razor, the principle of Occam's razor, we should just stop at G. Why postulate many causes when one cause is enough, when one cause gets the job done just fine? So, if that's the case, then G does not have a cause. It just exists, necessarily. Just as 2 plus 2 just is necessarily 4, and that's it. Now, I contend that whatever caused time to exist has got to be timeless. But if it's timeless, then it's eternal without beginning. And if it's eternal without beginning, then it just exists. Beginnings require time. So the cause of time has to be eternal without beginning. Timeless. But if it's timeless and beginningless, then nothing could cause G to come into existence, because that would require time. So whatever caused the clock to start ticking had no cause of its own. By definition, just logically, it could not have been caused to come into existence. Whatever it was. The atheist will say it was a state of affairs in which just nothing exists timelessly. Christians say that God exists timelessly. But right now we're just talking about G, not jumping to any conclusions. So remember step 1. If whatever begins to exist has a cause and G does not have a cause, then G doesn't begin to exist. This means that G alone, without the universe, does not exist in time or space. Remember, the universe is everything in time and space, all nature. Because time and space began to exist when the universe began. So here's some logical inferences. If you're in the workbook, these bottom 3 points, make a little bracket around those and write logical inferences on the side of your paper. It's been cool. I've been contacted by several people online saying that they're getting this book and working through, watching us on Facebook Live. They're going through this workbook with us. So it's not just us here in this room that's going through this booklet together, this workbook. All right, so the logical inferences here is that G is really powerful because it caused or made the whole universe, or the entire universe. We know that G is enormously powerful. I can't think of anything that requires more power than creating a universe from nothing. So it's enormously powerful. Does that mean it's omnipotent? No. It sure leaves omnipotence on the table. It kind of points that direction to say maybe this thing is omnipotent, but whatever it is, it's enormously powerful. Whatever G is. Second, because G made the universe, G cannot be in the universe, at least until G made it. And finally, because G made time begin, G cannot be in time, at least until G made it. That's pretty amazing. You think about this. Whatever caused nature to begin existing, by definition, must be supernatural. Something other than nature. Right? If all nature began to exist, then whatever caused all nature to begin existing has to be other than nature. If we're going to have, if we're going to consider ourselves to be coherent, logically coherent and rational thinkers, then whatever caused all nature to begin existing has to be something other than all nature. That's just what philosophers mean by supernatural. Whatever caused time to begin existing has to be timeless. And if it's timeless, then it's beginningless, because beginnings require time. And if it's beginningless, then it's eternal, without beginning. And it also has to be uncaused. So it's incoherent to then ask, well, what caused the cause of time? That's an incoherent question. You might as well ask, how much does the color purple weigh? It doesn't make any sense. If space began to exist, the cause of space must be spaceless. And therefore it must be not made of matter or immaterial, because matter requires space to exist. Another word for that can be spirit, but call it what you want. So right off the bat, considering the beginning of nature, space, and time, we've got a supernatural, timeless and eternal, uncaused, immaterial cause of the universe that must be enormously powerful. We can derive more. We can understand more about G, whatever G is. So far we've proven, on page 22, that there's a thing which we call G that made the universe. Nothing made G. G never began to exist, and G is not in time. G is immaterial. G is not in space. G is very powerful. This is enough for most people to see that G is God, but if you're not willing to take that step yet, we can also show that G, whatever G is a personal being. G is a person. The only possible things that we can think of that are both immaterial and can cause things to happen are minds. Like souls or spirits or ghosts. Maybe they're all the same thing. But even if you don't believe in these things, if you're out there in Facebook world thinking, I'm a naturalist, I think the only things that can be directly tested and discovered by science exist. Or some people would call that a physicalist or a materialist. Some people have different definitions for these terms. Some people use them interchangeably. I always ask, what do you mean by that? Okay, but I use the term naturalist as somebody that only thinks things that can be scientifically tested or discovered are the only kinds of things that exist. So maybe that's you out there thinking that's all. There's nothing like God that exists, or who would be an immaterial mind, and there's no such thing as human immaterial minds, or ghosts, or demons, or angels, or anything else like that. God or nothing like God exists. But if that's your view, it's at least possible that you're wrong. It's at least possible that these things exist. Now, philosophers, even those who are atheists or naturalists, would agree. And they'd say there's only two kinds of things that could exist apart from the universe. If the universe did not exist, what other things would still exist? Well, abstract objects like mathematics and numbers, or the laws of logic and shape definitions, things like that, those things would still exist. That's debatable. There's a lot of philosophers who don't think abstract objects really exist. See Dr. Craig's work on that. I've also got an intro-level article on the topic called The Abstract Dagger of Platonism, if you'd like to read that. But Dr. Craig's the expert on this issue. But we've got abstract objects that could possibly exist, and immaterial minds, something like a soul or a spirit or what have you. An immaterial thinking thing that could, thoughts aren't made of matter. You can't touch a thought. You can't weigh a thought or a belief, right? Beliefs don't weigh anything. The wrestler who's trying to cut weight for the duel doesn't accomplish his goal, doesn't get down to his weight by getting amnesia, right? They don't weigh stuff. Brains do weigh stuff. Brains have a weight. Beliefs don't, even though beliefs can be weighty, so to speak. So, since thoughts and beliefs are immaterial, it stands to reason that there could be immaterial thinking things. But by definition, abstract objects don't cause things. By definition, abstract objects are causally effete. Right? They're impotent to cause things. You don't have to look both ways before you cross the street in hopes that you don't get run over by the number 7, because they don't cause things. But minds, if they exist, immaterial minds, if they exist, are the kinds of things that could potentially cause things. So feel free to add options to the table of possibilities to consider, but after centuries of thinking this through, philosophers can only think of 2 kinds of things that could exist apart from nature, time, and space, and that's abstract objects or immaterial minds. But by definition, abstract objects don't cause things, so they could not cause the universe, so you're only left with an immaterial mind as the kind of thing, the only possible kind of thing that could cause a universe. These immaterial minds at least seem possible. For example, I know that I am, or maybe that I have a mind. I believe I am a mind or a soul with a body. And I believe that I can make my body move. And that is not determined based on the laws of physics and chemistry and the initial conditions of the Big Bang. I'm going to make a free choice right now to raise my right arm and wave at the camera. Hi, everybody. Right? I made that choice. I have free will. I'm a first mover. In a sense, you could call me, you could just say that I did a miracle of sorts, a mini miracle. Right? I'm an immaterial mind that can violate the laws of nature and make my body move. It's either that or the initial conditions of the Big Bang and the laws of physics and chemistry forced it to happen and are forcing the words out of my mouth and forcing the thoughts and beliefs that all of you have based on what physics and chemistry is forcing to come out of my mouth. Say goodbye to rationality if that's the case. Say goodbye to knowledge if that's the case. I've written a ton on that topic on my website. Click on a short video called The Freethinking Argument. But I believe that I am an immaterial mind that can make my body move. I'm responsible for at least some of my body's actions. Not all of them, but at least some of them. But it seems possible that I could have a different body. So I am not made of my body, which means that my mind is not the same thing as my body. I mean, how many of you have seen Freaky Friday? I've never seen it, but I saw the trailer. And the way I understand it is the daughter and the mom, they switch bodies and they switch brain. I mean, bodies and brain. They didn't switch brains and put the brain of one in the head of the other and vice versa. No, the body and brain stayed the same, in the same spot, but their minds, their souls went into the different body. Now, yeah, that's just a movie. But it seems possible, that's after all, that's why you can make a movie about it. In a world where people can change body, when that guy with that crazy voice, is always talking about movies, and in a world where this happens. He's basically saying, hey, in a possible world, it's possible that this could happen. So let's have fun and think about it in this possible world. You can't say, in a world where people are drawing triangles with 4 corners and jumping out of infinitely tall bottomless pits. You know, you can't do that because that's not even possible. There's no world where that exists. You can say it, but you can never show it. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back to what it means to be a person, or I should say, a mind is a person. And so, it follows that G is a person, an immaterial mind. Because rocks aren't persons, trees aren't persons, dirt isn't personal. You can't have a personal relationship with dirt, okay? But you can have a personal relationship with other minds. Now, we can ask, why did G cause the universe to exist? Well, there's only 4 answers. 1, there's no reason at all why G made the universe. It just did, and that's it. But that's a really bad answer. You may as well believe that all sorts of things can also happen for no reason, like tables or mountains just suddenly moving, uncaused. We would not use this answer for other things in life. We want to accept that answer. So it's a bad reason. It's no reason at all, actually. Well, what about the second option? You could say, well, something else made G do it. Again, we're asking the question, why did G cause the universe to exist? You could say, well, something else made G do it. Well, again, what do we got? Well, then that thing's G2. Well, what caused G2? Well, that was G3. What caused G3? G4, G5, and like a G6, you can't just keep going on into the infinite past of G's. Plus Occam's razor, that principle lets us know it's better just to stop with G. We've seen this problem before. Yes. Can we keep doing this problem? Or can we keep doing this forever? No, that would be a problem. So since we must stop somewhere, we might as well stop at G. So we can't use this answer. Well, let's try another option. What about 3? You could say G had to do it. And that's it. But the question is raised, why did G have to do it? There seems to be no reason why G had to. Also remember that G is not in time. But if something is not in time, it does not ever change. Changing from one state to another necessitates time. If there's ever a change anywhere, whether it's our universe or apart from the universe, then absolute A-theory time exists somewhere, even if it doesn't exist really in our universe, which seems absurd, right? But I've got articles on that. I'm not going to get into it here. Okay, so just remember that apart from time, things don't happen. Apart from time, things don't happen. So if you think things are happening, or ever have happened, then the A theory of time, dynamic time, is true. So if G doesn't change, and G had to make the universe, and G never began to exist, then the universe would never begin to exist either. For example, let's say that there was water in the fridge, and both the water and the fridge never began to exist. They were just always there, eternally. And the fridge was always on. The fridge was never turned on. It's been on into the eternally without beginning. Well then, wouldn't the water, if this is the case, be always and already cold? Yes. It wouldn't begin to get cold at any time if this thought experiment was reality, right? The water would never begin to get cold. It was just always cold. It should already and always be cold. So if G had to do it, with this in mind, if G had to do it, the universe would never begin to exist. But it did begin to exist. Remember step number 2 of the argument. This is backed up by science, we see. Scientific data supports the fact that the universe began to exist, and even apart from science, we can prove this logically. So, based on just metaphysical arguments. So this is a bad answer too. So options 1, 2, and 3 failed. But let's look at one more option. Option number 4 is that G chose to do it. And this, I contend, is the inference to the best explanation. This is the best answer. Why? Because it's an answer we give all the time to these kinds of questions. For example, well, why did she do that? Well, because she chose to. She has volition. She has freedom. Freedom of the will. She possesses free will, and she made that choice. And it was a volitional, free choice. So we don't need to keep asking, why did she do that? Because free choices explain themselves. I might choose to do something because of some reasons, but I don't have to have a reason for choosing. I can make an arbitrary choice. I have. But if G chooses at all, and it's up to G, then G is a person. Because only persons choose things. Apart from time and space, things don't happen. And if things are not happening, then nothing is causing G to choose. And so in this timeless state that G existed in, for lack of better words, the state of affairs in which G exists without the universe or anything else, there's nothing happening. Now we think this G is, I call this G God, right? Now maybe you're saying, well, what was God doing for all that time before he created the universe? Well, that's another example of an incoherent question. Time didn't exist. You might as well ask, well, why did God create so quickly? Because there was no time to be quick or slow in, right? So God exists in a state of affairs apart from time. God acts and causes the first change, and the clock starts ticking. And consider this. God has the power to erase the entire universe, everything that he's ever created before, right? But he could never erase time in that sense. Oh, sure, he could erase the central time zone. But even if God erased everything he'd ever done before, he could never create the universe again for the first time. So in that sense, time, once God creates it, will always exist. I've read more on that. So has Dr. Craig, if you'd like to look into these topics more. But G is a person, and we call this person God. So here's the rational inferences about the cause of the universe. I was going to call this cause of the universe G again, right? G made the whole universe. Nothing made G. G never began to exist. G is not in time. G is immaterial. G is not in space. G is very powerful, and G is a person. Now here's the cool thing. I haven't opened a Bible. I haven't quoted any Bible verses or anything like that. But if you're a person, then is it not true that you can have a personal relationship with any other person? Just thinking logically here on this Kalam Cosmological argument, even thinking logically about scientific data, because the scientific data supports both premises 1 and 2, which reaches the conclusion. We can see that the most coherent, rational inference here is to see that whatever caused the universe to begin existing is a person. And if it's a person, then it can have personal relationships with other persons. And if you're a person, it logically follows that it's at least possible for you to have a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe. We can come to that much without touching a Bible, and I have not touched a Bible. But that's exactly what the Bible says. Not that it's just possible for you to have a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe, but it tells you how to have a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe through Jesus Christ. Wow. Maybe we should take the Bible seriously. Now some people would want to say, well, G, it's not God, it's something else. Well, fine, call G whatever you want. But a rose by any other name smells just as sweet. I haven't touched a Bible yet, but let me touch it now. Psalm 148, verses 1 through 5. Praise the Lord from the heavens. Praise him in the heights above. Praise him, all his angels. Praise him, all his heavenly hosts. Praise him, sun and moon. Praise him, all you shining stars. Praise him, you highest heavens, and you waters above the skies. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for at his command they were created. The Kalam Cosmological argument is powerful. I think it's one that every Christian needs to know and memorize and keep it in their back pocket when you're telling people about the gospel. If you want to share the gospel with somebody, they might start by saying, well, why should I think the gospel's true? I don't even believe in God. Take it out of your back pocket, share the Kalam with them, and now you've set the stage. Because if God exists, then it can create the universe from nothing. Well, now God can raise a man from the dead as well. And if God raised Jesus from the dead, if that one statement is true, then Christianity is true. Hey, have a great day, and I'll see you next week.